Asan abandoned his elderly mother in the forest and yelled, "I won't take care of you anymore. Stay here to die." Days later, he bitterly regretted discovering what happened to his mother. Edmund, only 8 years old, shrank under the living room table, clutching a worn teddy bear that seemed the only remnant of better times. The silence of the house was only broken by the sound of heavy rain against the roof, and he listened with a knot in his stomach to the unmistakable sound of his mother's footsteps. Cassian, 34 years old, arrived home from work with a bitter smell of alcohol. Her eyes were half closed, and her face tense, marked by the wrinkles of someone who seemed to carry the weight of the world. Her unkempt brown hair fell over her shoulders, and her expression was a mixture of contempt and weariness. "Hiding again? Is it just like your father, a good-for-nothing who only knows how to run away?" Cassian's voice was cutting, echoing through the room as she looked around as if she saw the boy in every corner of the house. Edmund shrank even more, pressing the teddy bear against his chest, but there was no hiding place enough to ward off those words that hurt him as if they were blades. Cassian stumbled through the room, kicking chairs and bumping into furniture as if they were to blame for all the misfortune that had befallen her. The shards of broken bottles on the floor and the accumulated dirt in the corners of the room were the silent testimony of nights of uncontrol and anger. "Come out of there, you coward. You think you can hide from me?" She advanced to the table, leaning over, and her reddened eyes met Edmund's, who now trembled visibly. "I'm not a coward. I just wanted," he mumbled, his voice almost inaudible. Cassian pulled him out from under the table with a brutality that made him let out a small scream, the teddy bear slipping from his hands and falling to the floor. She held him by the arm, shaking him hard, and he tried in vain to break free. But Cassian gripped him more tightly. "Wanted what, huh? For me to treat you like a prince? For me to be the perfect mother to a useless thing like you?" She suddenly let go of him, almost throwing him to the ground. "Do you think this life is easy? Do you think I have time or patience to be coddling a whiny child?" she asked, making Edmund feel the impact of the words as much as the full weight of her resentment. He held back tears, aware that any tears would only make her even angrier. He felt so small, so incapable of retaliating. And the only thing he wanted was to disappear. He wanted to go back to his hideout under the table where he could delude himself that the world was less cruel. "I'm not useless, Mommy," he stammered. But Cassian interrupted with a bitter laugh. "Not useless? Look at you, always hiding, always whining, just like your father. You don't have the courage for anything, to face anything. I should have left you with him and disappeared from this filthy place." Her words were a punch with every syllable, and he felt the impact even without fully understanding everything she said. He only knew that his mother saw him as a burden, something she never wanted to carry. Cassian stumbled to a shelf and with a rough motion knocked over some plates, which shattered on the floor, creating a cacophony that made Edmund shudder. "You should be grateful to have a roof. Do you think this is a game? Do you think you can be a kid and dream big?" she yelled, her face contorted, almost unrecognizable. "Look at this house. Look at this life that you've trapped me in. I'll never have peace. I'll never rest with you around." Edmund lowered his head, trying in vain to protect himself from the words that hurt more than any physical blow. Each sentence from his mother seemed to squeeze his heart, fear and sadness mingling in a suffocating feeling. He wanted to scream, wanted to say it wasn't his fault that he never asked to be born, but the lump in his throat prevented him from speaking. "Maybe one day you'll understand what it's like to have a mother who has to fight alone," she said, her gaze fixed on him, her eyes red with anger and fatigue. Edmund slowly raised his gaze, hoping to find some trace of compassion on that face, but all he saw was the face of a stranger, someone he no longer recognized. Cassian was not the loving mother he dreamed of. She was a woman full of bitterness and resentment, someone who saw him as the symbol of everything that had gone wrong in her life. "I just wanted you to really see me, Mommy," he thought, holding the teddy bear in his lap as if it were the only thing that still gave him any solace. Cassian, however, did not seem willing to stop. She approached him again, her eyes half closed, and pointed a finger at him, her voice low and bitter. "You're going to grow up to be nobody, Edmund, just like your father, a failure. It's no use dreaming, it's no use wanting anything. That's the destiny you've chosen." She shook her head, laughing bitterly. "I should just leave you on the street. You'd fend for yourself better than here, living off me." Her final words cut deep, and Edmund felt like even the air was failing him. He wanted to protest, wanted to beg her to stop, but knew that nothing he said would change what Cassian thought of him. He knew her only. She saw him as a burden, an obstacle to any hope she might have had. One day he looked at her silently, trying to understand how someone could be so cruel to their own child, but the answers did not come. "Who knows, maybe one day, all this will end," he muttered softly. But Cassian was no longer listening. At the small neighborhood school, Edmund anxiously awaited the moment of the awards ceremony. It was the most important day for him. His performance in mathematics would finally be recognized, and he hoped his mother would be there to watch. The teachers and other students were gathered in the auditorium, and he looked at the door every minute, believing that Cassian would arrive, even if late. The expectation on Edmund's face was almost palpable, a mixture of nervousness and hope. It was as if that certificate were proof that he was not a burden but someone of value. However, the chair next to him remained empty. She will come, she promised she would come, he thought, trying to convince himself. The ceremony began, and Edmund's name was announced as the best math student of the year. His heart raced, and he walked hesitantly to the stage. While the teacher handed him the certificate, the auditorium applauded, but when he looked at the door again, he realized the reality: Cassian would not come. A void took hold of his chest, a bitter feeling he knew well. Still, he held the certificate firmly and raised his gaze, determined not to let anyone see his sadness. One day, she will be proud of me. I will be someone important, he promised himself, trying to mask his disappointment. When he arrived home, Edmund found Cassian sitting in the living room, her gaze distant and tired. He entered holding the certificate, hoping that at least at that moment, she could see something good in him, that she could recognize his effort. He took a few shy steps toward her, his heart pounding. He wanted to show her what he had achieved, and wanted to see some pride in her eyes. "Mom, I won. I was the best in math," he said, extending the certificate toward her as if it were a trophy. Cassian looked at the piece of paper in his hand with disdain, with no trace of emotion on her face. She took the certificate with contempt, turning it over as if it were an object of no value. Her gaze narrowed, and her face assumed the expression of weariness and disinterest that Edmund already knew. "And what does that mean, Edmund? Is that paper going to put food on the table? Will it pay the bills?" she said, her voice cold and cutting, returning the certificate to him without even looking him in the eye. He lowered his gaze, feeling a twinge of shame. He knew that an award would not change the reality of the house, but it was his achievement, something he had done alone. Still, he tried to insist, holding the certificate with both hands as if it were the only proof that he had any value. "But Mom, I tried so hard. They said I'm the best in math. Isn't that important?" Cassian snorted, rising from the couch with an irritated expression. She snatched the certificate from his hands with a sudden motion and walked toward the kitchen, where she sharply opened the drawer and grabbed a box of matches. Edmund followed her, confused and with a heavy heart, seeing his dream of recognition crumble before his eyes. "Important? Do you really think those things make a difference in real life?" Edmund, she lit a match and watched the flame for a moment before bringing it closer to the certificate. "Paper is worthless. I need money, food, someone who is useful. That's just a silly illusion." A fire began to burn the corner of the paper, and Edmund, horrified, took a step forward, reaching out to try to stop it, but hesitated. He felt helplessness invade his body, as if he were being consumed along with the certificate. The flames spread rapidly, and he saw the achievement turn to ashes, piece by piece. "Please, Mom, don't do that. This award is all I have. It's my only achievement," he pleaded, but Cassian completely ignored him. She just dropped the piece of paper into a trash can and watched as it was consumed by fire. Her gaze was cold and impassive, as if it meant nothing. Edmund looked at the ashes that remained and felt a silent rage grow inside him, an anger he had never experienced before. He wanted to scream, he wanted to tell her how much it hurt, but he knew nothing would change. "Why do you do this, Mom? Why won't you let me be happy?" Just once he finally mumbled, his voice choking. Cassian just shrugged, ignoring the suffering he expressed. To her, that achievement was insignificant, and the sight of Edmund with tears in his eyes had no impact whatsoever. She walked to the sink, grabbed a glass of water, and drank without even looking at her son. Remained there immersed in the pain of having lost the only thing he considered important. Life is not about happiness. "Edmund, it's about survival, and you're not helping me at all with these silly things." She placed the glass in the sink, looking at him with disdain. "If you want to do something for me, find a way to be useful. This is just a waste of time." Edmund felt a lump in his throat. He had never felt so humiliated, so small. That award, which he believed to be the beginning of something great, was now nothing but ashes at the bottom of a trash can. He held back his tears. But something inside him slowly changed. A determination was forming, a promise he made to himself. "One day you'll see, Mama. I'll be important and you'll regret all of this," he thought, his eyes still fixed on the ashes. Cassian didn't seem to care about anything he said. She looked at him as if he were just a burden, a nuisance she didn't know how to resolve. Edmund then withdrew from the kitchen, but each step he took echoed with silent rage. He knew at that moment that the desire to prove his worth would never leave him. Edmund was sitting in the small kitchen of Mr. Albert's house, an elderly and kind-hearted neighbor who, for a long time, had perceived the boy's suffering. Albert, with gray hair and a kind face marked by age wrinkles, observed him in silence while offering him a glass of water. He was well aware of the difficult situation Edmund faced with Cassian, the absent and severe mother, and always tried to offer some comfort when the boy showed up at his door. For Edmund, that temporary refuge meant the relief that his own home never provided. "Don't worry, Edmund. Here, you can rest without fear. Stay as long as you need," said Mr. Albert, placing a comforting hand on the boy's shoulder. Edmund nodded silently, holding the glass of water with trembling hands. It was hard for him to feel safe, even in the house of someone as kind as Mr. Albert. The words of affection calmed him momentarily, but he knew that at any moment, Cassian could appear and drag him back to the harsh reality that awaited him. He tried to convince himself that he deserved that small drop of comfort, but guilt and fear would not leave him in peace. "Will I ever be able to feel at peace like this without having to hide?" he thought, gripping the glass tightly. But the moment of peace was quickly interrupted by the sound of a loud knock on the door. Edmund's gaze became immediately frightened, and Mr. Albert stood up, casting a cautious look at the boy, as if he knew what was about to happen. Upon opening the door, there was Cassian, her face contorted with fury and her eyes full of an almost uncontrollable rage. She looked at Mr. Albert with disdain, as if he had committed a great betrayal. "I knew he would be here. What do you think you're doing, Albert?" "This boy is my son, my rules," said Cassian, pushing past the neighbor and pulling Edmund by the arm with brutality. Albert tried to intervene gently but firmly, holding Cassian by the arm, trying to make her realize the gravity of the situation. He knew that this mother was going too far, and his heart tightened to see Edmund being treated that way. For Albert, the boy deserved more than the harsh words and violence with which he was treated. Cassian, however, turned and looked at him with a venomous gaze, challenging him to say anything that could stop her anger. "Cassian, you can't treat your son like this. He's just a child, he needs affection, not cruel punishment," Albert said, trying to remain calm but his voice failing upon seeing Edmund so cowed. But Cassian only laughed with a bitter tone that made Albert recoil. She pulled Edmund harder, ignoring the neighbor's looks of protest. For Cassian, what Mr. Albert thought didn't matter. For her, this was her son, and no one had the right to tell her how to raise him. She dragged him out of the neighbor's house, the boy trying to keep up with her rapid pace, but being pulled mercilessly. "I've already told you my son, my rules, and you'll learn to obey me, Edmund, even if it's by force," she hissed through clenched teeth, ignoring the silent protest in her son's eyes. As they walked back home, Edmund tried to hold back his tears. Fear and revolt invaded him, mixed in a whirlwind of emotions that he could barely handle. He wished he had the courage to face Cassian, but every time he tried to speak, the words died in his throat. He knew that anything he said could make the situation worse, so he kept silent, keeping everything to himself as he always did. "One day, I swear I won't have to endure this anymore. One day, everything will be different," he thought, with a new determination forming in his chest. When they arrived home, Cassian pushed him inside, slamming the door behind her. She was consumed by rage, as if his presence in the neighbor's house was a personal insult. Without saying anything else, she pulled him towards the dark room, a small, windowless room where she left him when she wanted to punish him. Men knew this place well, and what it meant to spend hours there alone, without light, and with fear growing with every minute. His heart pounded as he tried to control his accelerated breathing. "Maybe this will teach you not to meddle where you shouldn't. You want to run to other people's houses? Well, now you'll learn to respect the rules here," she said, pushing him into the room. Edmund fell to the floor as he was pushed, but he didn't cry. He felt the tears, yes, but he also felt something deeper and darker within him, a promise that he would never, ever forgive Cassian for what she did to him. He knew he was just a child, but that feeling of hatred grew stronger every day. As he heard the sound of the key turning in the door, he hugged himself, trying to control his breathing. "I swear I'll never forget this, Mom. One day you'll pay me for all of this," he muttered, his eyes fixed on the darkness. With every minute in that dark room, Edmund felt fear giving way to anger, and anger growing into a promise of silent revenge. He remembered Albert's words, the neighbor's attempts to protect him, and realized that perhaps there was someone willing to take care of him, someone who saw him beyond the burden that Cassian insisted on imposing on him. The darkness enveloped him, but he imagined a future where he would no longer feel a prisoner of her control. If not even Albert can protect me, then I'll learn to protect myself, he told himself, his heart hardening a little more. Days later, Edmund's room seemed even smaller and more stuffy than usual. At night, he was sitting on the bed, looking out the window at the starry sky. It was his birthday, and he was turning 9. The silence of the house was almost deafening, broken only by some distant noises outside. The stars shone, dotting the darkness, and he watched them with a timid hope, as if there he could find something to take him out of that life of fear and loneliness. He knew asking to be happy was something distant, so he sought something simpler. "Please, star, I want to be strong when I grow up, stronger than my mom," he whispered, his voice choked. Cassian's voice echoed through the house, breaking the silence and the slight moment of peace that Edmund tried to create. She was in the kitchen. The sound of pots and objects being thrown from side to side echoed through the house. He knew she was preparing something for his birthday, but he couldn't feel joy or anticipation. Cassian never did anything without a purpose behind it, and more than anyone, he knew that his mother didn't let any opportunity pass to remind him of her disdain. "I just hope that at least today you don't humiliate me, Mom," he thought, sighing. The minutes passed, and Edmund heard the sound of the kitchen door opening. Cassian appeared in the hallway holding a small tray where the cake should be. The smell of burning filled the air, and he immediately realized that something was wrong. The cake he had so longed for as a kind of consolation was just a burnt and misshapen mass. He felt a tightness in his chest, a mixture of frustration and sadness that seemed to want to suffocate him. "Look, your special cake," Cassian said with a bitter smile, approaching him. "I hope you're not expecting anything prettier than that." Edmund looked at the cake, trying to hide his disappointment. It wasn't just the appearance of the cake that hurt him, it was the fact that Cassian had done it on purpose. He would be happy if his mother gave him any old cake, even a burnt one, as long as he knew she had made it from the heart. But Edmund could see in her eyes that there was a sadistic pleasure in watching his sadness. He lowered his head, feeling his face hot, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to roll down. "It's okay, Mom. I know you can't have everything you want. I'm happy that this year you remembered it's my birthday. I don't care about the appearance of the cake," he mumbled in an almost inaudible voice, trying not to show how much it affected him. But Cassian didn't miss the opportunity to mock him. She laughed loudly, with a sharp laugh that echoed through the room, making Edmund feel even smaller. For her, his sadness was something funny, something that strengthened her in some way. She put the cake on the little table next to the bed and crossed her arms, looking at him with an air of superiority. "Look at that, so ungrateful. Can't even appreciate what I do. Do you think it's easy to do anything in this house? You should be grateful," she said, her voice loaded with irony. Edmund felt humiliation grow inside him like a flame, but remained silent. He knew responding would only make things worse. He looked at the burnt cake, trying to disguise the revolt that bubbled inside him. Cassian continued to stare at him, waiting for some reaction, something that would confirm the power she had over him. "One day I'll be strong enough that none of this will hurt me," he thought with a silent determination that grew in his chest. She leaned over, taking a piece of the cake with her fingers and throwing it onto his plate with contempt. The dough crumbled, showing how poorly made it was. Cassian smiled as if that were the final victory and took a step back, watching him with the expectation of seeing his sadness. He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to contain his anger. "Come on, Edmund, eat. I want to see you. Enjoy the cake I made especially for you," she provoked, her voice loaded with sarcasm. He took a small piece, feeling the bitter taste that reinforced Cassian's disdain. Every bite was a reminder of the reality he lived in, a confirmation that his mother would never change. But at the same time, every swallowed piece was a silent promise that he would become someone she could not humiliate again. "Thank you, Mom." "It's good," he said with difficulty, though he knew it was an obvious lie. Cassian watched his attempt to disguise his sadness but realized she hadn't quite gotten what she wanted. The boy didn't cry, didn't react as she expected, and that made her even more nervous. She approached, taking the cake and crushing it with force as if she wanted to destroy even the attempt for him to find any satisfaction. "There, good. "This is what you deserve, Edmund, nothing more than a piece of trash," she said, her voice cold. He looked away, but her words pierced like knives. Edmund looked at the stars through the window, longing for a future where he could free himself from that cycle of suffering and humiliation. He knew asking for love from Cassian was in vain, so he promised himself that one day he would leave all that behind. "One day I won't need any of this. One day. You won't have power over me anymore," he whispered to himself, his gaze fixed on the stars. His mother took a step back, laughing softly as she watched him. For her, each of his birthdays was a reminder of her own failure, the date she had been waiting for it to come. She needed to do what was necessary before it was too late. And at that moment, Edmund realized that if he wanted to survive this, he would have to be stronger than he ever imagined. 29 years later, Edmund, now a more mature man, was sitting in his spacious and luxurious study, surrounded by glass panels and modern furniture that reflected the success he had built. At 38 years old, he was the director of one of the country's largest companies, respected and feared in equal measure. The impeccable appearance and calculated gaze were part of his trademark. He exuded confidence and authority, characteristics he used to keep everyone around him at a safe emotional and professional distance. However, the touch of the telephone interrupted his meticulously controlled routine. "Sir, there's a woman. She says she's your mother, Cassian." "She said her name is Cassian?" "Well, she's at the reception and wishes to speak with you," the receptionist informed him, her voice hesitant. Edmund remained silent for a moment, his face hardening at hearing that name. It had been years since the last time he had seen her or even heard about her, as he had decided to leave home as soon as he came of age and never look back. The news was unexpected and provoked a mixture of feelings that he thought he had buried. He looked at his watch, sussing the time. He could make her wait. The anger and contempt he harbored for Cassian were still fresh in his memory, like scars impossible to erase. "Tell her to wait, I'm busy," something she never was. "For me," he said coldly, hanging up the phone before the receptionist could respond. Hours passed and Edmund kept himself occupied with meetings and reports, deliberately ignoring Cassian's presence at the reception. The image of his mother from years ago still haunted him, every memory of abuse and contempt